The rain had not stopped since morning. It fell in heavy sheets that blurred the outlines of the gravestones, soaking through coats and umbrellas alike. I stood frozen at the edge of the cemetery, the damp grass clinging to my shoes as I stared at the fresh mound of earth. My daughter Emily had been lowered into the ground only an hour earlier, and yet it already felt like years since I had last heard her voice. The other mourners had drifted away, their umbrellas bobbing like dark clouds retreating into the distance. I lingered, unable to move, holding a single white rose that trembled in my hand. My fingers clenched so tightly around the stem that thorns bit into my skin, but I hardly noticed. The pain inside me was greater than any cut could cause. I should have been surrounded by family, comforted in this unbearable moment. Instead, the only person left was Darren, my son-in-law. He stood a few feet away, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket, as if the funeral had been nothing more than an inconvenient meeting. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead by the rain, but his expression remained hard, detached. When he finally spoke, his words cut deeper than any downpour ever could. "You can't stay in the house anymore," Darren said, his voice cold and final. "It's mine now. Pack your things tonight." I blinked at him, certain I had misheard. "What are you talking about?" My voice cracked, nearly drowned out by the rain. "Emily wanted me there. She made me promise I wouldn't live alone after her mother passed. That house was her home, and mine." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought I glimpsed satisfaction in his eyes. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, though his tone remained sharp as a knife. "Her wishes don't matter anymore. She's gone. And you," he jabbed a finger toward me, "don't belong there. Find somewhere else to stay." The world seemed to tilt under my feet. How could he say such things on the very day we had buried Emily, my daughter, his wife, the woman who had loved him despite his flaws? I searched his face for some trace of grief, of kindness, of shared loss, but all I saw was disdain. "You're serious," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Dead serious," Darren replied with a smirk that twisted my stomach. "Be gone before midnight." The rain pressed harder, running into my eyes, but it wasn't the storm that blinded me. It was humiliation, sharp and bitter, burning hotter than the grief that already consumed me. Around us the cemetery had grown silent, save for the drumming of rain on stone. There was no one left to witness my disgrace, no one to speak on my behalf. That night I stood in the hallway of the house that had once been filled with warmth, the house where Emily's laughter used to echo against the walls. Now it felt foreign, cold. I packed my belongings into 2 worn suitcases, just clothes, a few photographs, and an old watch that had belonged to my father. Every item felt like a memory torn from my daughter's life, reminders of moments I would never have again. Darren leaned casually against the doorway as I worked, his arms crossed, watching me with a look of satisfaction that made bile rise in my throat. He didn't offer help. He didn't say a word of comfort. He simply observed, as though evicting me was entertainment. When I finally dragged the suitcases to the porch, he followed. The rain had eased into a drizzle, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I paused, turning to face him one last time, searching for any trace of humanity, but he only smirked again. "Don't come back, Harold. We're done here." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the quiet street. I stood there, the bags at my feet, my clothes damp and my heart shattered. The house loomed behind me, its dark windows staring like hollow eyes. It was no longer mine. Emily was gone, and with her passing, Darren had erased me from the last piece of her world I had left. I walked aimlessly that night, dragging the bags through puddles as the city lights blurred around me. Neon signs flickered against wet pavement, but they offered no warmth, no shelter. I passed strangers on the sidewalk, but none looked my way. To them, I was just another old man weighed down by time and sorrow. Every step was heavy. Every corner reminded me of Emily. I heard her laughter in the echoes of passing cars, imagined her voice whispering, "It'll be all right, Dad." But it wasn't all right. Nothing was. By dawn, my legs gave out on the steps of a church downtown. The stone was cold against my back as I sank down, exhausted, the suitcases sagging beside me. My stomach ached with hunger, my hands stiff from the chill. For the first time in my life, I felt truly invisible, as though the world had no place for me anymore. And yet, even in that darkness, a faint ember of defiance flickered inside me. Darren thought he had cast me out for good, stripped me of dignity and family. But fate has a strange way of turning the wheel. What neither of us knew that morning was that a secret long buried was about to rise, one that would change everything. And when the truth surfaced, Darren would regret every cruel word he had spoken in the rain. The city does not pause for grief. By the time the morning traffic began to hum and car horns pierced the silence, I was already part of the scenery, just another old man sitting on stone steps with 2 bags at his side. People passed quickly, their umbrellas still dripping from the night's rain, their eyes fixed on schedules and screens. No one saw me, or perhaps they did and chose to look away. I had always believed invisibility was a gift reserved for magicians or children playing hide-and-seek. But here on these church steps, I discovered it was a curse. To be unseen, to be passed over as though you had ceased to exist. There was no sharper wound to a man who had already lost everything. The hunger arrived before noon. My stomach clenched and growled, reminding me that grief did not erase the body's needs. I searched my pockets and found only a few crumpled bills, not enough for much more than a stale sandwich and weak coffee from a corner deli. I ate slowly, drawing out each bite, trying to quiet both the ache in my gut and the ache in my chest. As the day wore on, I dragged my bags through streets I had once known so well. They were streets where Emily and I had walked together, her arm looped through mine as we pointed out shop windows and laughed at passing dogs. Now those same streets mocked me. The bakery where she used to buy muffins smelled just the same, sweet and warm, but I couldn't bring myself to step inside. The memory alone was too heavy. By evening I had found myself at the bus terminal, where the smell of gasoline and damp coats filled the air. I considered leaving the city altogether, running from the ghosts of Emily, from Darren's betrayal, from the humiliation that clung to me like the rain. But where would I go? There was no home waiting, no family eager to welcome me. The thought of boarding a bus to nowhere felt even lonelier than staying. So I stayed. That night, I wandered into a narrow alley near the church, where the glow of a neon sign flickered weakly against brick walls. A group of men huddled around a barrel fire, their coats ragged, their eyes sunken. They looked at me briefly, but said nothing, returning to their quiet warmth. I wanted to approach, to join them, but pride held me back. I wasn't like them, I told myself. I wasn't homeless. I was just lost for the moment. But as the hours stretched on and the cold seeped deeper into my bones, I realized the truth I didn't want to admit. I was exactly like them, cast aside, forgotten, a man with nowhere to belong. Sleep that night was fitful. I curled against my suitcases, using one as a pillow, the other as a shield. The sounds of the city kept breaking through. Sirens, laughter from bars, the distant rumble of trains. Every noise reminded me that life carried on for others, while mine had unraveled into pieces. Morning light crept over the rooftops, pale and indifferent. My back ached, my hands numb from the cold. I rose slowly, brushing dust from my coat, and wondered how much further I could fall. It was then, as I stood unsteady on the street corner, that a small act of kindness broke through the grayness. An older woman with silver hair and gentle eyes approached me. She carried a paper bag filled with sandwiches and bottled water. Without hesitation, she offered me one. "You look like you could use this," she said softly. I opened my mouth to refuse, but my pride was outweighed by hunger. Thank you, I murmured, my voice barely audible. She gave me a kind smile. There's a shelter 2 blocks over. They serve hot meals in the evenings. Tell them Margaret sent you. They'll take care of you. For the first time since Emily's funeral, I felt the sting of tears rising, not from humiliation this time, but from gratitude. A stranger had seen me, not just as a burden, not as a ghost, but as a man in need. I clutched the sandwich in my hands like it was a treasure. That single act of compassion kept me moving that day, one step after another. And though I didn't know it yet, Margaret's kindness would be the first thread in a web of connections that would change my fate entirely. Still, as the sun sank behind the skyline and shadows stretched long across the streets, I couldn't shake the image of Darren's smirk in the rain. His cruelty had left me with nothing, but the city, harsh as it was, had not swallowed me whole. Somewhere inside, a quiet flame still burned, and though I was not yet ready to face him, I promised myself this. Darren had not seen the last of me. The shelter Margaret had told me about sat in a brick building that had once been a school. Its windows were barred, its paint faded. But when I stepped inside, I was greeted by the warmth of soup, simmering, and the sound of voices, not cruel or mocking, but human. The line for dinner stretched down a narrow hallway, men and women clutching trays, each with their own story of loss. Some faces were young, weathered far too early. Others were like mine, lined with years and heavy with disappointment. I kept my eyes down, ashamed to stand among them, ashamed to admit that I belonged here. When it was my turn, a man with a broad smile ladled stew into my bowl. "Eat up," he said. "Plenty more where that came from." His tone was cheerful, without pity. For the first time in days, I felt something other than grief and bitterness. I found an empty seat at a long wooden table and ate slowly, savoring the heat that spread through my chest with every spoonful. Around me, conversations rose and fell, people trading jokes, stories, even arguments. Life was happening here in this room of castaways. Across the table sat a man about my age with a gray beard and a knit cap pulled low. He studied me for a moment before speaking. "First night?" I nodded, unsure how much to reveal. He chuckled softly. "You've got that look. Like you're still trying to convince yourself you don't belong here. Don't worry. We all thought that once." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I forced a small smile and returned to my stew. Later that evening, I found myself sitting in the corner of the shelter's common room. A group of volunteers moved through the crowd, handing out blankets and cups of tea. One of them was Margaret. She spotted me, her eyes lighting up as she approached. "I'm glad you came," she said warmly, setting a blanket on my lap. "There's no shame in needing help. Don't forget that." Her kindness chipped away at the wall I had, built around myself. I wanted to tell her everything, about Emily, about the house, about Darren's cruelty. But the words lodged in my throat. How could a stranger carry the weight of my pain? That night, lying on a narrow cot with the blanket pulled to my chin, I listened to the sounds of the shelter, snoring, whispered prayers, the shuffle of restless feet. I thought of Emily again. She had always believed in kindness, in giving to others. Perhaps that was why Margaret's compassion struck me so deeply. It reminded me of my daughter's heart. Days passed. I drifted between the shelter and the streets, carrying my bags like anchors. Margaret would check on me whenever she could, offering words of encouragement, sometimes slipping me an apple or a cup of coffee. She never asked for details, never pressed, just treated me as though I mattered. One Sunday, I followed her into the church next door. The building smelled of incense and old wood, the kind of place where time seemed to slow. I sat in the back pew, staring at the stained glass, the light filtering through in shades of blue and gold. The priest, Father Thomas, spoke not of sin or punishment, but of endurance. "Life tests us in ways we cannot foresee," he said, "but the measure of a person is not how low they fall, but whether they rise again. The word struck me like a bell ringing in my chest. Rise again. I wasn't sure I believed I could, but something in me stirred. After the service, Father Thomas approached me. His eyes were kind, steady. "You look like a man carrying a heavy load," he said gently. "You don't have to carry it alone." I wanted to laugh at the idea. Alone was all I had left, but instead I just nodded. "Thank you, Father." Walking out of the church, I noticed Darren's car across the street. Sleek, expensive, parked carelessly at the curb. My stomach tightened as I watched him step out, laughing with a woman I had never seen before. She was young, dressed in a red coat that clung to her like fire. They walked arm in arm into a restaurant, his hand at her back, as though Emily had never existed. My fists clenched. I turned away before they could see me, bile rising in my throat. Darren had not only cast me out, he had already replaced my daughter. That night, I lay awake on the cot, staring at the ceiling. The kindness of Margaret and Father Thomas had given me a thread of hope, but Darren's laughter echoed in my ears. He thought he had won. He thought I was beaten. But life has a way of circling back. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was not the end of my story. Not yet. And soon enough, fate would place something in my hands that would change everything. The weeks blurred together in a haze of cold nights and restless mornings. I had begun to grow accustomed to the rhythm of the shelter. Breakfast served at dawn, afternoons wandering the city with my bags, evenings returning for a meal and a cot. Life had shrunk into survival, and though Margaret's kindness made it bearable, I carried grief like a stone in my chest. It was on one of those gray afternoons that something unusual happened. I was sitting on the church steps, watching people pass with their coats pulled tight against the wind, when a man in a dark suit approached me. His polished shoes seemed out of place against the cracked sidewalk. He stopped in front of me and cleared his throat. "Are you Mr. Harold Bennett?" he asked. His voice was professional, almost clipped. I hesitated, wary. "Yes," I said cautiously. He nodded, reaching into his briefcase. "I've been asked to deliver this to you." He pulled out a thick envelope, sealed with a crest I didn't recognize, and placed it in my hand. Before I could ask who had sent it, he turned and walked briskly down the street, vanishing into the crowd. I stared at the envelope for a long moment, my fingers trembling. Who would send me anything? I had no family left but Emily, and she was gone. My friends from years past had drifted away, lost to time and distance. It made no sense. Inside the church, I found a quiet corner and tore it open. Papers slid into my lap, legal documents stamped with heavy seals and a letter addressed to me. The words blurred at first, my mind struggling to grasp them. But as I read, my breath caught in my throat. The letter claimed that I was the sole heir to the estate of a man named Richard Whitmore, a wealthy industrialist who had passed away years earlier. It explained that Whitmore had once been connected to my family, though the details were vague. For reasons I didn't yet understand, my name had only recently surfaced in connection with the estate. The documents instructed me to contact a law firm downtown to discuss the matter further. My hands shook as I tried to process the information. Was this some cruel joke? A mistake? Or was fate finally offering me something after stripping everything else away? That night, I showed the envelope to Margaret. She studied the papers with narrowed eyes, then looked at me with a mix of surprise and hope. "This doesn't look like a scam," she said firmly. "The firm listed here is legitimate. You should go. See what they have to say." Her confidence gave me the courage I lacked. The next morning I dressed in my cleanest clothes, though they were far from presentable, and made my way downtown. The law office towered above the street, all glass and steel, so different from the worn bricks of the shelter. My reflection in the polished doors looked like that of a stranger, unshaven, tired, carrying the weight of years. Inside, I was met by a receptionist who glanced at me with polite suspicion, as though she doubted I belonged in such a place. Still, she directed me to a conference room where two attorneys waited. They introduced themselves as representatives of Whitmore and Associates. "Mr. Bennett," one began, folding his hands on the table. "We've been searching for you for quite some time." I swallowed hard. "Why? I don't understand. I didn't know Richard Whitmore." "Perhaps not directly," the lawyer replied, "but our records show you are his last living relative, through a family branch that was long thought lost. Mr. Whitmore's estate is substantial. The will is clear. In the absence of direct heirs, it passes to you." The words hung in the air like thunder. Substantial, estate, heir. They sounded foreign, belonging to a world far removed from the cot I slept on each night. As they spoke of trusts and holdings, my mind drifted to Darren. I pictured his smug face the night he had thrown me out, the satisfaction in his eyes as he slammed the door. What would he say if he knew the man he had cast aside had been sitting on a fortune all along? The lawyers slid another envelope across the table, this one thinner. "Inside are preliminary documents. You'll need to undergo verification, but once completed, the estate will be legally transferred to you." I left the office in a daze, the city spinning around me. My steps carried me back toward the shelter, though I barely felt the ground beneath me. All I could think of was the irony. Darren had believed he had stripped me of everything, reduced me to nothing. Yet fate, in its strange timing, had delivered a key back into my hands, a key that could open doors he had slammed shut. That night, as I sat on the cot with the envelope clutched against my chest, I realized something. Life was giving me a choice. I could remain the broken man Darren believed me to be, or I could rise from the ashes of my grief and reclaim my dignity. And perhaps, just perhaps, I could make Darren answer for the cruelty he thought would go unanswered. The days that followed felt unreal. I carried the envelope everywhere, afraid to let it out of my sight. Each time I unfolded the papers, the embossed seals and heavy signatures reminded me that this wasn't a dream. Somehow, against all logic, I had been named heir to a fortune that could alter the course of my life. But with the flicker of hope came a darker current I couldn't ignore. My thoughts returned constantly to Darren. He had cast me into the streets with nothing, confident I would disappear quietly. What would he do if he discovered that I now held the keys to wealth and influence he could only imagine? It didn't take long for the answer to reveal itself. One afternoon, as I was leaving the church, I saw Darren across the street. His expensive car was parked crookedly by the curb, hazard lights blinking. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing wildly. Even from a distance, I could hear the strain in his voice. "I told you. I'll have the money soon," he barked, his face red with frustration. "Just give me another week." The words struck me like a revelation. Darren wasn't the picture of stability he pretended to be. He was desperate, cornered. Before I could move, a woman in a red coat approached him, the same woman I had seen days earlier, laughing at his side. She tugged at his sleeve, speaking quickly. He waved her off, irritation etched across his features, before shoving the phone back into his pocket. For a brief moment, his eyes scanned the street and landed on me. Recognition flashed, followed by a sneer. He leaned down to whisper something into the woman's ear, then steered her toward the car. A moment later, the engine roared and they sped away. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay on my cot at the shelter, staring at the ceiling. Darren's face burned into my mind. His arrogance had not changed. If anything, it had grown sharper. But beneath the surface, I sensed cracks forming. Debt, desperation, secrets waiting to unravel. Margaret noticed my distraction the next morning as she handed out coffee. "You've seen him again, haven't you?" she asked gently. I nodded, lowering my voice. "He's in trouble. I could hear it in his tone. Whatever mask he wears, it's slipping." She studied me with those steady eyes of hers. "Then be careful. A man like that, when cornered, will lash out. Don't let him know what you've been given. until the time is right." Her words settled in me like a warning bell. I tucked the envelope deeper into my coat pocket, guarding it as though it were the only thing standing between me and ruin. Days turned to weeks. I attended meetings with the lawyers downtown, answering questions, signing forms, piecing together the family history I had never known. They explained that Richard Whitmore had been a distant cousin of my late mother, a branch of the family tree lost through circumstance and silence. I had been overlooked for decades, but meticulous records eventually led them to me. Every visit to that office felt like stepping into another world. Polished wood, gleaming brass, people speaking my name with respect. Yet when I returned to the shelter each night, reality reminded me where I still stood. My shoes were worn, my hands calloused, my bed nothing more than a thin mattress among dozens of others. One evening, as I walked back from the office, I saw Darren again, this time outside a high-stakes card club on the edge of downtown. He was arguing with a man in a tailored coat, his voice raised, his movements sharp and frantic. The man shoved a finger into Darren's chest and then walked away, leaving him standing alone, breathing heavily. I stayed in the shadows, watching. Darren pulled at his hair, muttering under his breath before stumbling toward his car. His shoulders sagged with the weight of defeat, but when he started the engine, his expression hardened again, like a mask snapping into place. I realized then that his cruelty toward me hadn't been born merely of disdain. It had been driven by need. He hadn't cast me out of Emily's house because I was a burden. He had done it because he needed control. Control of the house, of her possessions, of anything that could be turned into money. And he would never stop reaching. That night, as I sat on the church steps with the city lights flickering around me, I thought of Emily. I imagined her disappointment in the man she had married, the betrayal of vows she had once believed in. My heart ached for her, but at the same time, I felt a rising fire within me. Darren believed he had erased me. He believed the world had no place left for an old man like me, but fate had placed an extraordinary secret in my hands, and soon enough he would learn just how wrong he had been. The shadow of his greed was growing, stretching longer with each passing day, and though he didn't know it yet, he was walking straight toward the reckoning he had earned. The morning of the meeting, I woke before the sun. Sleep had been shallow, broken by dreams of Emily's laughter and Darren's sneer. I sat on the edge of the shelter's cot, staring at the envelope on the nightstand as though it might vanish if I looked away. Today I would finally learn the full truth about the inheritance. Margaret insisted on walking with me to the law office. She pressed a clean scarf into my hands before we left, fussing over my collar as though I were her brother. "Stand tall," she said with a reassuring smile. "You belong in that building just as much as anyone." I wasn't so sure, but her words clung to me as we walked through the bustling streets. The glass tower of Whitmore and Associates gleamed above us, reflecting the pale morning light. My stomach tightened with each step inside. The receptionist greeted me with practiced politeness and directed me to a large conference room on the top floor. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Heavy books lined the shelves, and portraits of stern-looking men watched from the walls. At the center sat Amanda Sterling, one of the senior attorneys I had met before, her posture straight and professional. "Mr. Bennett," she said warmly, motioning to the chair across from her, "I'm glad you came." I lowered myself into the seat, my hands gripping the armrests. "I still don't understand why any of this involves me," I admitted. Amanda folded her hands, her expression softening. "Then let me explain. Richard Whitmore, whose estate we represent, had no surviving children. His fortune and holdings, Whitmore Industrial, several properties, significant financial assets, were left to his closest blood relative. After years of tracing family records, that person turned out to be you." Her words seemed too large to fit in the room. Fortune, properties, assets. I tried to absorb them, but my mind could only latch onto one. Me. "I don't know anything about him," I said quietly. "That's not unusual. Amanda replied. Branches of families drift apart. But his instructions were clear. The inheritance must go to his blood, not outsiders. That makes you the rightful heir. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of factories, office buildings, and long rows of signatures. My name appeared on the last page, typed in bold letters, waiting for me to claim it. A wave of disbelief washed over me. Only weeks ago I had been standing in the rain with nowhere to go. Now the weight of an empire rested at my fingertips. Amanda leaned forward, her voice gentler now. I know this must feel overwhelming, but understand this. You are not powerless. You are not forgotten. You carry a legacy meant to endure. The choice is yours, Mr. Bennett. You can step into this role, or you can refuse it. But the estate belongs to you, whether you believe it or not. My throat tightened. For so long I had been defined by loss, by Emily's absence, by Darren's cruelty, by the emptiness of nights spent on cold stone steps. And now here was a chance, not only to reclaim dignity, but to honor my daughter's memory with something greater. I closed the folder slowly. What do I need to do? Amanda's lips curved into a small smile. Verification first. Documents, identification, some formalities. Then we transfer the estate into your name. In time, you'll have the power to decide what becomes of Whitmore Industrial. But let me warn you, wealth attracts attention. There will be those who suddenly remember your name. Not all of them will have good intentions. I didn't need her to explain who she meant. Darren's face flashed instantly in my mind. After the meeting, I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, feeling taller somehow, though my shoulders still carried the weight of disbelief. Margaret waited at the corner. When she saw my expression, her eyes widened. Well? She asked eagerly. It's true, I said, my voice trembling. The fortune is real, and it's mine. She pressed a hand to her chest, tears glistening in her eyes. Oh, Harold, Emily would be so proud. We walked slowly back toward the shelter, and for the first time in weeks, I noticed the city differently. The skyscrapers no longer felt like walls closing in, but towers waiting to be reclaimed. The crowds didn't pass through me as if I were invisible. They brushed by, unaware of the storm that was quietly beginning to shift. That night, as I lay awake on the cot, I replayed Amanda's words. You are not powerless. For so long, Darren had made me feel exactly that. Helpless, erased, insignificant. But he was wrong. The awakening wasn't in the money or the titles waiting for me. It was in the realization that I had been handed a second chance, not just to survive, but to rise. And when the time came, Darren would learn that the man he had tossed aside was no longer the broken figure in the rain. He would learn what it meant to face a Bennett who refused to bow. The papers were signed. The verification was complete. In the span of a few weeks, my life had shifted from the shelter's cots and soup lines to polished conference tables and long meetings with attorneys. Every signature I scrawled seemed to carry the weight of generations. Every page a reminder that my days of invisibility were numbered. But the strangest change wasn't in the documents or the bank accounts. It was in me. One morning, Amanda insisted that we visit a tailor before our next meeting. I tried to protest. Old habits of humility clung stubbornly, but she would not hear it. Mr. Bennett, she said firmly, you're about to step into a role of responsibility. You need to look the part. The tailor's shop smelled faintly of cedar and starch. Mirrors surrounded me as swaths of fabric were draped across my shoulders, pins clicking into place. For the first time in years, I stood straighter, almost startled by the reflection staring back at me. The tired old man in a fraying coat was still there, but now there was something else too, a glimmer of the man I had been long ago, before loss had hollowed me out. When the tailor finished, I slipped into a dark suit that fit like it had been waiting for me all along. My reflection startled me again, this time because I looked like someone who belonged in those glass towers downtown, someone who could command a room instead of shrinking into the background. As I left the shop, people on the street glanced my way differently. No longer did they pass through me as though I were air. They moved aside, nodded politely, even offered smiles. The change of clothes was only fabric, but the way the world responded reminded me of something Amanda had said. You are not powerless. Margaret nearly cried when she saw me in the new suit. My goodness, Harold, she whispered, covering her mouth with her hands. You look like yourself again. Her words warmed me more than she could know. For weeks, she had carried my hope when I couldn't. Seeing pride in her eyes reminded me that this transformation wasn't only for me, it was for Emily too. My daughter had always believed her father was strong, capable, honorable. For the first time since her death, I felt like I was proving her right. With each passing day, I stepped further into my new role. The lawyers explained the vastness of the Whitmore estate, factories, real estate holdings, investments across the country. I attended board meetings where men and women in crisp suits spoke in careful tones, watching me with curiosity. Some doubted me, I could see it in their eyes. But when I spoke about fairness, about preserving jobs, about using wealth responsibly, silence followed. Respect grew slowly, but it grew. Still, in quiet moments, I thought of Darren. I wondered if word had reached him yet. I imagined his shock, his disbelief, perhaps even his fear when he learned the man he had thrown onto the streets now held more power than he could ever grasp. One evening I stood at the window of the law office, gazing down at the glowing city. The reflection in the glass showed me a man I barely recognized, yet one I was proud of. I whispered softly as though Emily could hear, I'm not broken any more, sweetheart. I'm coming back. The next day brought an unexpected moment of clarity. As I left a meeting, I walked past a cafe where I saw Darren seated at a corner table. He didn't notice me. His focus was on the woman in the red coat. His laughter rang out, loud and false, his hand resting on hers as if the life he had shared with Emily had never existed. For a moment, anger surged through me, raw and blinding. I wanted to march into that cafe, stand tall in my new suit, and show him exactly who I had become. But I didn't. Not yet. Revenge demanded patience, and I had waited this long already. Instead, I turned away, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Let him laugh while he still could. Let him believe he had triumphed. The storm he could not see was gathering, and soon it would break over him with the force of every cruel word he had ever spoken. That night, as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, a stark contrast to the shelter's crowded noise, I allowed myself a rare moment of peace. I was no longer drifting, no longer a man cast out. I was Harold Bennett, heir to a legacy, father to a daughter whose memory deserved justice, and the time was approaching when Darren would learn that the man he had dismissed as nothing had returned, stronger than ever. The law office felt unusually tense that morning. I had been summoned for another round of discussions regarding the estate, but Amanda's tone over the phone suggested there was something more awaiting me. When the elevator doors slid open onto the 32nd floor, I sensed it immediately. The hush of the staff, the way their eyes lingered just a moment too long as I walked past. Amanda met me at the conference room door. Her expression was steady, but her voice held a note of caution. Mr. Bennett, there's someone here requesting an audience. I thought it best that you decide whether to see him. I frowned, stepping into the room. At the far end of the long mahogany table sat Darren. He looked different, his once polished suit wrinkled, his tie loosened, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. But the arrogance remained, clinging to him like a second skin. The moment he saw me, his mouth twisted into a sneer. Well, isn't this something? The old man crawled his way back into civilization. I stood tall, refusing to flinch. What are you doing here, Darren? He leaned back in the chair, spreading his arms as though the office belonged to him. I heard a little rumor, he said smoothly, though his voice carried an edge. Something about you suddenly being flush with cash. Inheritance, estates, all that nonsense. I thought I'd stop by and congratulate you." His sarcasm was a blade thinly wrapped in velvet. "You didn't come to congratulate me," I replied evenly. "You came because you want something." The smirk faltered, just slightly. He leaned forward now, elbows on the table. "Look, Harold, let's not play games. I know you. You're not cut out for this world of suits and ledgers. You've been sleeping in shelters, eating charity meals. You wouldn't know what to do with a fortune if it fell in your lap." His tone softened, a counterfeit warmth seeping in. "But me? I could help. I could make sure the money grows, make sure it's used properly. We could work together?" I almost laughed, but the bitterness in my chest kept the sound sharp. "Work together? You threw me out of Emily's house the night we buried her. You left me standing in the rain with 2 bags and no roof. And now you come here asking for partnership?" For the first time, Darren's confidence wavered. His eyes flicked toward Amanda, who sat quietly taking notes, her expression unreadable. He shifted in his seat, trying to regain footing. That was grief talking. "We were both grieving, Harold. I said things I didn't mean." The memory of his smirk that night, the satisfaction in his eyes, flared in my mind. "No," I said firmly. "You meant every word." His mask cracked then, frustration seeping through. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. There are people, powerful people, expecting money. If I don't deliver soon, I'm finished. I just need a little help. A loan in advance. Something. You owe me that much, after I took care of Emily all those years." At the mention of my daughter, my chest tightened. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "You don't speak her name to me. Not here. Not like this." Darren's jaw clenched, but desperation shone in his eyes. He was unraveling, and he knew it. Amanda cleared her throat softly, sliding a document across the table. "Mr. Bennett, it might interest you to know that Richard Whitmore's will contained a special clause. It forbids the estate from assisting anyone found guilty of exploiting or mistreating the heir. That decision rests solely with you, of course, but the clause was designed to prevent manipulation." Darren's face went pale. His gaze darted between us. Realization dawning, I looked him squarely in the eye. "You thought you could discard me like trash, Darren? You thought I'd fade into the alleys and never rise again? But fate has a way of balancing the scales. You wanted control. Now you're the one on your knees." His voice cracked as he tried one last time. "Harold, please! I can't do this without help." For a long moment, I simply studied him. The man who had once held power over me was now trembling, his pride stripped bare. And though anger burned in me, what I felt most was clarity. "You had your chance," I said finally, "and you threw it away. Whatever storms you face now, you face them alone." With that, I turned and walked from the room, the sound of Darren's protests echoing behind me. The door shut with a solid click, sealing the moment like a verdict. As I stepped into the hallway, Amanda's hand rested briefly on my arm. "Well handled," she murmured, but I hardly heard her. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the strange exhilaration of justice. For the first time since Emily's funeral, I felt the scales tipping back toward balance. Darren had confronted me in the one place he thought I was weakest. Instead, he had found the man he underestimated, reborn, unbroken, and ready for the reckoning still to come. The days after our confrontation passed in silence on my end, but I knew Darren's life was unraveling quickly. I didn't need to see him to feel the tremors. Desperation has a way of echoing, and his footsteps were growing frantic in the city I once wandered invisibly. Rumors reached me first through whispers at the law office. Darren had been seen arguing outside the card club again, his voice carrying down the street. The men he owed money to were no longer patient. Their smiles had vanished, replaced by threats muttered in alleys and phone calls made at ungodly hours. One afternoon, Amanda placed a file on the table during our meeting. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. Your son-in-law, she said carefully, has debts beyond what most could crawl out from under. Creditors, private lenders, men with little interest in courts or contracts. He's been trying to use your name to buy time. So far, unsuccessfully. The thought made my stomach turn, but not with pity. It was the audacity. Even after everything, he was still trying to wring worth out of me, to trade on the very name he once mocked. That evening, I walked past the restaurant where Emily used to celebrate birthdays. Through the glass, I saw Darren sitting alone at the bar. His tie was gone, his hair disheveled. He stared into a half-empty glass, the woman in the red coat nowhere in sight. He looked smaller somehow, not the confident figure who had laughed on Emily's arm months earlier, but a man crumbling under the weight of his own vices. I stood there longer than I should have, torn between stepping inside or moving on. In the end, I walked away. Not out of mercy, but because I realized I didn't need to confront him again. His own choices were dismantling him piece by piece. The collapse grew sharper in the weeks that followed. Darren's expensive car disappeared from its usual haunts, repossessed by a lender. The house, Emily's house, was stripped of furniture, sold in haste to cover debts he could no longer manage. I heard from Margaret, who had overheard gossip at the shelter, that he had been spotted at pawnshops, trading watches and cufflinks for fractions of their worth. Every shred of arrogance he once carried was being peeled away, leaving nothing but desperation. And yet, the cruelest moment came when he appeared at the church one rainy afternoon. I was sitting inside, listening to Father Thomas's sermon, when I noticed him slipping quietly into the back pew. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale. He sat hunched, staring at the floor as if the words being spoken had no place to land. After the service, he lingered near the door. When he caught sight of me, his eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen before. Not arrogance, not anger, but shame. For a moment, I thought he might approach, but instead he lowered his head and walked quickly into the storm, swallowed by the gray curtain of rain. That night, lying in my hotel room, I thought of Emily. Part of me wondered what she would have said, seeing her husband unravel this way. Would she have begged me to help him, to show mercy? Or would she have seen the truth I could not ignore, that Darren's downfall was of his own making, a tower built on cruelty and greed, destined to collapse under its own weight? The next morning, Amanda called. His creditors filed notice, she told me. He's bankrupt. The courts will have their way with what little remains. But beyond that, Harold, there's nothing left for him to stand on. I listened in silence, the words both heavy and strangely hollow. Justice had arrived, not by my hand, but by his own. When I hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the city spread below. For so long I had wandered these streets unseen, carrying grief like a stone. Now I stood with the weight lifted, not because the pain had vanished, but because I finally understood. Darren's cruelty had never defined me. His fall was proof of that. He had cast me aside, believing I was nothing. Now he was the one discarded, stripped of wealth, of respect, of the illusions he had wrapped himself in. The fall of Darren was complete. But my story was not finished. There was still one final step to take, one last choice that would determine how I carried the legacy fate had placed in my hands. And I knew deep down that Emily would be watching. The morning sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, casting a golden light across the city skyline. From the tall windows of my office, I watched the streets below come alive. Commuters rushing, vendors shouting, taxis honking. Life surged on, relentless and indifferent. Yet for me, the world had shifted. The Whitmore estate was fully in my name now. The ink on the final documents had dried, the lawyers had shaken my hand, and the board of directors had acknowledged me as their new head. But this power, this wealth, didn't thrill me in the way it might have once. No, it carried weight, a responsibility that pressed on me every day. I thought of Emily constantly. In every decision, I asked myself what she would have wanted. Her memory was the compass I followed, and it was her voice I heard that morning as I stood in the sunlit office. Do something good with it, Dad. Make it count. Intended to. But there was still Darren. I had not seen him since that rainy afternoon at the church, though whispers of his downfall reached me often. He had been evicted from the house, stripped of his car, left with nothing but debts and shame. The woman in the red coat was gone just as quickly as she had appeared. The card sharks who once welcomed his money now chased him down alleys. He had become a shadow of the man who had once smirked in my doorway, throwing me into the storm. And then one evening he appeared at my office. He didn't come through the front. He wouldn't have been allowed past the reception desk. Instead, I found him waiting outside as I left, leaning against the stone wall like a beggar who had lost his way. His clothes were worn, his face pale, his eyes sunken. "Harold," he said, his voice hoarse, stripped of its former arrogance. "Please, just a word." I stopped, regarding him carefully. The sight stirred no triumph in me, only a quiet recognition that fate had delivered what I alone could not. "What do you want, Darren?" I asked, my tone even. He swallowed hard. "A chance. Anything. I've lost everything. I don't have anywhere to go. I know I don't deserve it, but please," his voice cracked, "help me." The silence between us stretched. For a moment I saw not the man who had mocked me, but the hollow shell left behind. Yet mercy is not the same as foolishness. Emily had always believed in forgiveness, but she had also believed in justice. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving his. "The night we buried Emily, you threw me into the rain like I was nothing. You laughed as the door shut in my face. Do you remember?" His lips trembled. "I was grieving." "No," I cut him off. "You were cruel. You made your choice, and now you live with it." His shoulders sagged, the last threads of pride snapping in the wind. "I won't drag you through the streets as you did me," I continued, "but don't mistake me for your savior. Whatever future you have left, you build it yourself. You'll get no handouts from me, Darren. Not now, not ever." I turned and walked away, his voice calling weakly after me, fading into the noise of the city. I did not look back. The next morning I stood at the groundbreaking ceremony for a new shelter funded by the Whitmore estate. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, but my thoughts were far from the spectacle. As I placed the first spade of soil onto the earth, I whispered my daughter's name. "This is for you, Emily." The shelter would house those who had no place to go, those the world ignored, men and women like the version of me who had once shivered on church steps, invisible and broken. If my fortune meant anything, it was this, turning pain into refuge, grief into hope. As the crowd applauded, sunlight warmed my face. For the first time since Emily's passing, I felt something close to peace. Darren had fallen, his cruelty consumed by his own choices, and I had risen, not through revenge alone, but through purpose. A new dawn had come, and though Emily was gone, I carried her forward with every step.